They'd cut hay here. This one was being grazed. But the way it was being grazed, there was stock water at the pivot center, and it was being grazed in 8 pie pieces. Done with temporary fence, but every time you moved the fence, it was 1,460 feet. When I got there, he was using, and he'd been doing this for several years, but he was using the 3/8 inch fiber rod post for his temporary fence, had a straight crank reel, and remember, I'm at 1,460 feet, so it's not one of these standard size reel, it's the jumbo reel, which is bigger and more cumbersome to use. To do the usual chores and move the animals over, take down a fence, set up the next one, took 2 hours. One of the first things that I did was I threw away the fiber rod post, and this is crazy, because we have rocks every time you stop, it's basically put down the post you have, take your mallet, and drive that post in, because you couldn't just push them into the rocks. Whereas these, you can take and work through the rocks and get them in. Changing from the fiber rod post to this post took 45 minutes off the chore time. That's how much difference having the right tools make. Changing, and I had brought some from Missouri with us. And then we got rid of the straight crank jumbo reel, went to a 3-to-1, it's still a jumbo reel, but the 3-to-1 Orion reel, and that cut another 30 minutes off. So what he had been doing for several years, taking 2 hours each time he did a paddock shift, we cut down to 45 minutes by changing the tools. And then what we did the next year was put in the infrastructure. The only permanent fence, there was already a perimeter fence around the pivots. Halfway between the outside circle and the outer reach, we built a near circular fence, put stock water points out on that near circular fence rather than going to the pivot center. So what we've done now is we have cut in half the distances of running temporary fence. Rather than 1,460 feet, we're at 730 feet now, which is just a handful of stepping posts. The standard reel typically takes me 12 minutes to take down one fence, set it back up. Usually we have anywhere from 300 to almost 600 head up here, so I'm taking 12 minutes plus or minus, moving every day to take care of 500 plus or minus cow-calf pairs. So we've cut the travel distance in half, we've reduced the distance or the fence distance in half, we've reduced the distance they're traveling for water, we've taken the focal point away from always coming to the pivot center for water. We've got better manure distribution, all that. Okay, this looks very different than the flexible designs I've been drawing. It isn't. We're still in a parallel corridor. It's just round instead of rectangular. That's why I'm saying it kind of doesn't matter the environment you're in, the situation you're grazing in. You take the same basic concepts and apply them. We just have a circular corridor rather than a straight corridor. But we're doing exactly what we ended up doing in Missouri, or what I would have done anywhere else I'd gone with this. This is a 110-acre piece, client up in Iowa. They're doing pasture-finished beef and pasture-finished lamb. Here we've made the corridors 330 foot wide. Why? Because they're doing sheep. And to me, the best temporary fencing for working with sheep is the electric netting. Electric netting comes in 165-foot rolls. You put 2 of them together and you have 330 feet. And so we needed to make the column width that we could span with 2 pieces of electric netting. So for each flock of sheep, we have 6 pieces of electric netting. 2 spanning the column ahead of the sheep, behind the sheep, 2 set up for the next move. And then it's the same basic strategy of move the sheep into the next strip, take down what had been the back fence, leapfrog it up to become the next fence. We've just configured the permanent fences, the red lines, to accommodate 2 pieces of electric netting rather than working with, reels and step-ins like we would for cattle.
But how hard is it to put up that netting?
When you learn how to do it, it goes pretty quick. When we had sheep, when we were on the farm in Missouri, I think at one time I had 17 rolls of electric netting that we were using. And I don't remember necessarily timing myself for that, but I can take it down, put it up pretty darn quick. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that you kind of roll it up and then unroll it. If you do that, you will hate the stuff and you'll never want to do it. It's just a matter of pulling the post, kind of bunching it into your hand and walking along with it, never stopping, and you can go pretty quick with it. Yeah.
3-wire permanent subdivisions.
3-wire permanent subdivision.
Well, why can't you get away with 3 strands of polywire hidden behind the herd?
Okay, good question. And the tools are a little different for it. You can get these 3-in-1 reels that actually have 3. They have guides on it, but they have 3 pieces of polywire on it. There's the Ridley Rapid Arrow, which runs out 3 wires at a time when you put and it carries your stakes and you put them in as you're going. I tried some different 3-wire poly systems, and I found that I could do the electric netting faster than any of those. The electric netting did cost more. To me, it was much more effective than the 3 wires. I know other people who use 3-wire systems, and I don't think PowerFlex handles the Ridley Rapid system or any of that. But if you're going to do multiple strands of polywire, that's probably the best system that there is.
So you didn't try to control the vegetation where your netting was at prior to putting it in?
Okay.
You just put it down.
No, the question was, did we try to control the vegetation before we put the electric netting down? The only control I did was kind of walking sideways and knocking down while I was putting it behind me. And again, we got on very well with the electric netting.
My experience with electric netting is it's very good for predator proof too.
Yeah, we had sheep for 9 years when we were up there in North Missouri. We had neighbors completely put out of the sheep business by dogs and coyotes. And the 9 years and just a little over 100 ewes, maybe 120 ewes is the most we ever had. But in the 9 years that we had sheep, we never lost a lamb, a ewe, anything to dogs or coyotes. We had 8-wire hot ground electric perimeter fences and interior electric fences, and we used electric netting. We also had guard dogs. And so to me, in the Midwest, when you're dealing with dogs, coyotes, foxes, things like that, they're a very manageable problem. If you do the right steps, they're not a problem. You can deal with them. In the West with, wolves and lions and bears aren't so bad, but wolves definitely, I haven't figured out how you manage those yet. I think we have one over here. Okay, back here.
What size charger did you use on that for the electric?
What size charger? Now, Doug will tell you that you just can't arbitrarily say you need X number of joules per mile. We usually use the criteria of 1 joule per mile of fence, not per mile of wire, but per mile of fence. This outfit here, I think probably would recommend a 6 joule charger on there. There's only about 3 miles or so of permanent fence, but with electric netting, we always like to have more charge. So to me, this would be like a 6 joule. The Stay Fix X6i would be the energizer I would recommend for a system that size.
That would be strands of the web wipe on the...
Oh yeah, we would have 6 sections up at any time, and it would take care of it. Some of you might know Nathan Sanko, Back to Basics Beef over at Everton, Missouri. That's kind of the landscape he was on. This is a winter shot. Just the system that we set up there. There were quite a few ponds there, and he wasn't interested in putting any pipeline water or anything. So we designed a grazing cell just around the pond systems. The red lines are permanent fence, and so again we create these spines coming down through. This is not part of the property. This is not. There's I think this was 60 acres up here, and then it meets at a corner here, comes on down and around. So it had other properties kind of in the way, but we tied it all together with a single energizer by bringing a spine down here, fencing out the pond, had controlled access to the pond, a couple of offset wires on these boundary fences to tie the electrical system together, and then again coming down, and there's a pretty good ravine down through here, so we cut across one side of it, and again we're creating a spine to provide the power to all the other fences. The green fences are semi-permanent poly braid. He didn't want to put in permanent fences there. He wasn't sure if he wanted to move fences more or less. So initially it was set up with some semi-permanent poly braid. The distances on some of these are longer than what, like this one's just over 1,050 feet, I think. They're longer stretches than I would typically want to run. They were set up semi-permanent. I think he has since, after doing this for a couple of years, now he's doing more ultra-high stock density grazing, and these fences are being moved. But it just shows taking the ponds, working with existing ponds, and not doing any additional water developments. You can do it that way. Let's change perspectives and go out west and look at, a big operator. We just talked about using polywire and stuff on relatively small properties here. 60,000 deeded acres, 90,000 acres of public land. How do you subdivide and manage a place like this? Is there a place for polywire on a scale like this? Let's see what they did. This is a typical paddock for them. A paddock, and they're doing the rotational grazing. 5,000 acres, that's their paddock. The red lines are barbed wire fences, permanent fence, and they run along these ridge tops. You see this paddock is essentially one drainage basin. Over here would be the next paddock. It's going to be the next drainage basin, so on and so forth. You'll notice there's no fence across the top here. That's because you're going right up the mountain there. It gets real steep and rocky, and not very many cows will go out over the top. So there isn't even a back fence there, because most cows won't go up that high. The problem that they had, and it's real common in the West, you probably have never seen it in the Ozarks, and that's cattle concentrating along the creek. You ever see that? Why does NRCS and Fish and Wildlife want us to fence cattle out of the creeks? Because they spend too much time there. This is just happening on the bigger scale. And, they have typically, there'd be about 600 cows in this pasture, and they'd be there for a couple of weeks, rotate to the next one. The blue dots, there were springs up higher on the landscape. But again, cows prefer to walk downhill. If they can go downhill, find good grazing and water, they stay there. So every couple of days, the cowboys would go up and, push them back up the mountain. Most cowboys, this is what they live for, is to just go out and push cows around. But eventually, even the most hardcore cowboy gets tired of pushing the same cows up the same hill, for a couple of weeks, this year, next year. And so one of the cowboys, whose name was Lloyd, said, well, can we put up an electric fence and hold them up high to the springs, let them graze everything on top, and then let them down? And so they put up what they called the Lloyd fence. The Lloyd fence was a 5-mile polywire fence that separated the lower part of the basin from the upper part of the basin. Now, you shouldn't even be able to energize 5 miles of polywire. They put a 2-joule solar charge about halfway through the system. I guess it's right here at this creek. They put a 2-joule solar energizer there. So they're running about 2.5 miles each way. Again, you should not be able to energize polywire for 2.5 miles. It worked. The cattle stayed up here. There were, 20 or 30 that would break through and get down here. They put them back up there. And then they realized after about the third time, this is the same 20 cows. And so they just let them stay down there. And then the fence stayed up better. And so what we're looking at here is essentially strip grazing on a huge scale. What did they get out of it? 40% more grazing capacity out of that unit than what they typically would get, because they used the electric fence to hold the animals up higher. This has since been installed as a permanent